In the burning heat of the Arizona desert, a lioness lay dying in the middle of labor, while Atlas, the mighty king of the plains, didn't roar or threaten. He simply stared toward the dusty horizon as if begging for help. When the rescue team arrived, they found something that froze every seasoned ranger in their tracks. The lioness had stopped breathing for several seconds, and what came out of her body moments later was something none of them would ever forget. Moving slow. The sun had barely touched the rim of the Sahara Ridge Reserve when the quiet of the desert broke with a sound so faint it almost vanished into the wind. A lioness lay stretched across pale grasses, her flanks rising in small, desperate tremors. Her eyes fluttered open only long enough to reveal a glimmer of pain before shutting again, as if her body no longer had the strength to hold the world in focus. The dawn light cast long shadows across her ribs, and each shallow breath seemed to argue against time itself. Just a few feet away stood Atlas, the dominant male of this territory, though nothing about him resembled the confident king he was known to be. His mane, dark and heavy, shifted with each strained exhale of his mate. He did not roar. He did not pace. He simply watched her with a helplessness so raw, it felt almost human. Every few moments he lowered his head and nudged her shoulder as if reminding her to breathe, reminding her that he was still there. But even his strength could not pull her back from the cliff she was slipping toward. Several miles away, inside the ranger station's monitoring room, a young wildlife technician named Wyatt stared at the grainy feed from a motion T-triggered camera. At first he thought the lioness was simply resting in an odd position. But when he zoomed in, his stomach tightened. Her abdomen contracted violently, then stilled. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The screen flickered slightly, and before Wyatt realized what he was witnessing, the lioness's chest stopped moving for a full second, then two, then three. Wyatt leaned forward until his forehead nearly touched the screen. He whispered, "Come on, breathe. Just breathe." When Atlas abruptly lowered his head to her in a frantic gesture, Wyatt understood that this was not a routine birth gone long. This was a crisis, one that could end in silence. He grabbed the radio with a trembling hand, calling into the emergency channel reserved for life or death situations involving protected animals. In Arizona, such calls required immediate response not only for wildlife protection policies, but because every endangered life had legal oversight. It was the kind of moment where the right action mattered as much as any high-stakes decision in a medical emergency or an attorney's courtroom negotiation. Static crackled, followed by the calm voice of Ranger Haley Thompson. Wyatt relayed what he saw. Labored contractions, signs of collapse. The male lion's distressed behavior. There was no hesitation on Haley's end. She requested the field rescue unit medical supplies and a veterinary service kit, the way a doctor might request trauma tools in an ER. It felt strange, Wyatt thought, how similar the worlds of humans and animals were when someone's survival hung on a thread. Insurance could protect a home or a car, but nothing, not money, not paperwork, could guarantee the life of a lioness bleeding out in the open desert. Back on the reserve, the lioness's breathing wavered again, so soft that the wind nearly erased it. Atlas lowered himself beside her, folding those massive paws beneath his body, pressing his flank against hers to keep her warm. The desert was beginning to brighten, but instead of life waking, it felt like the morning was holding its breath. A hawk circled overhead, in quiet, uneasy loops, as if sensing the fragile line between life and death unfolding below. The lioness attempted to shift her weight, but her legs trembled and gave out. Her head dropped into the dirt, dust rising in a thin cloud around her muzzle. Her tail twitched one miss, then didn't move again. A deep rumble rolled from Atlas's chest, not the warning roar that scattered intruders, but a low, mournful vibration that carried across the open plain. It was not anger. It was grief, maybe even a plea. Wyatt watched the feed helplessly while coordinating updates with Haley's team. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine being out there kneeling beside the Lioness, offering whatever comfort a human could give. But he also knew the laws of the wild didn't make room for wishful thinking. Without skilled intervention, without the right medical care, this Lioness had minutes at best, and a pride without its mother meant generations lost. He swallowed hard as the Lioness's body heaved once more, then fell still. The moment the rescue truck rolled out of the station, Wyatt whispered a quiet prayer. Not because he thought the desert listened, but because doing nothing felt unbearable. On the screen, Atlas raised his head toward the horizon, as if he could already sense help coming. His amber eyes glowed with an intensity that made Wyatt shiver. It was as though the lion was willing anyone to understand what he couldn't say. And in that single breathless instant, the desert changed. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the sun rising. It was the unmistakable feeling that nature itself had cried out for help, and someone had finally heard it. The desert wind had begun to pick up by the time Haley Thompson reached the far edge of the reserve. Her truck rolled over the dry earth with a muted rumble, followed closely by a second vehicle carrying Evan, Dr. Lucas, and Maya. The sky was still stray with the last traces of morning gold, but the urgency in Haley's voice had already pulled everyone into a sharper state of focus. Emergencies involving predators required the same precision as a medical response team, or even the fast coordination seen in a home insurance claim after a disaster. Every second mattered. Every decision had weight. As they approached the coordinates Wyatt had transmitted, Maya studied her camera, documenting the operation for the reserve's archive. It wasn't for entertainment. It was for accountability, for training, and for the long-standing wildlife protection policy that guided their every move. These animals weren't just part of a landscape. They were part of a legacy, and that made saving them feel almost like defending a family's inheritance. The moment they crested a small rise in the terrain, Haley saw Atlas. Even from a distance, his presence dominated the plain. The massive lion stood rigid, his silhouette sharp against the pale grasses. But instead of roaring at the approaching vehicles, he took a step forward, and then another, not in aggression, not in defense, but with a strange, searching awareness. Like a father scanning the horizon for help, Haley slowed the truck and let it roll to a stop. For a moment, no one spoke. Atlas stared directly at them. His mane shifting in the breeze, his chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. Something in his posture felt profoundly wrong for a lion of his stature. There was no threat in his stance, no territorial flair. His eyes, usually fierce, amber, unyielding, seemed to flicker with something that human instinct immediately recognized. Desperation. "He's not guarding," Evan murmured from the second truck. "He's waiting." Haley nodded, her hand steady on the door. "Lions don't behave like this unless they've exhausted every instinct. He's out of choices." Wyatt's shaky voice came through the radio at that moment. "Haley, she hasn't moved. Her breathing's nearly stopped. I just checked the feed again. Atlas hasn't left her side." Haley exhaled slowly. She looked at her team. "We go in carefully, but we go." Dr. Lucas adjusted his veterinary pack, checking the emergency oxy kit and the surgical tools. If she's in obstructed labor this long, her uterus may be rupturing. This could get complicated fast. Maya, still filming, swallowed her nerves. "Atlas doesn't look like he wants to stop us." "Maybe not," Haley answered. "Asshole, but he's still a wild lion." We step out slow, no sudden moves. She cracked open the truck door. The metal hinge gave a soft groan, and Atlas's ears twitched. Haley stopped holding still for 3 seconds. Then she stepped down onto the sand boots, settling quietly into the earth. Atlas watched, and then unbelievably he stepped back. Evan whispered, Did he just make room for you?" Haley barely nodded. She kept her eyes on Atlas, her movements calm, deliberate. "He knows. Somehow he knows why we're here." The lioness was only a few yards behind him, her body half-curled, her breathing shallow, like a spent candle flame. Haley could see the dirt clinging to her muzzle, where her head had fallen earlier. Her flank trembled in sporadic bursts, tiny waves of pain that never fully rose before fading again. When Haley moved a few inches closer, Atlas suddenly issued a deep Chesson rumble. Not a threat, but a warning shaped by fear. She stopped immediately. "It's okay," she whispered, keeping her voice as even as a seasoned attorney negotiating fragile terms. "We're here to help her." The desert held its breath. Atlas lowered his head slightly, eyes flicking between Haley and the lioness. Then, with a slow heaviness, he shifted to the side, revealing the full extent of his mate's suffering. It was the kind of gesture Haley had never witnessed in all her years working with large predators, an animal relinquishing its role as protector, because the need for help outweighed the need for dominance. Dr. Lucas moved forward, next crouching carefully as he assessed the lioness from a distance. "Her contractions are failing. She's losing too much fluid. If we don't intervene at once, we could lose the entire litter and her." Evan positioned the tranquilizer gun, adjusting dosage based on weight and the lioness's weakened state. "Haley, if Atlas changes his mind even for half a second, we're in trouble." Atlas took one step closer, his immense shadow falling across Haley's boots. But instead of attacking, he sat. A slow, deliberate movement, one that said, "I am here. I am watching. Do what you came to do." Haley felt the hairs rise on the back of her arms. Nature had many ways of speaking. Today it was speaking through silence, through trust, so fragile it felt sacred. She turned back toward her team. "We're moving in. This is the only chance she has." Behind her, Atlas lifted his head toward the morning sky, letting out a low, vibrating sound that rolled across the plain like a final plea for mercy. It wasn't anger. It wasn't dominance. It was hope-thin trembling and heartbreakingly real, and it was enough to push Haley forward into the fight for the lioness's life. The air around the lioness felt unnaturally still, as if the desert itself understood that one wrong movement could change everything. Haley approached slowly, every step measured her palms open and visible. Atlas's golden eyes tracked her with the intensity of a creature torn between instinct and desperation. His muscles were coiled not for attack, but for uncertainty, like a parent unsure whether to shield or surrender. The tension pressed into the air so heavily that even the wind seemed afraid to cross the space between them. Haley knelt just a few feet from the lioness, the dry earth warming beneath her knee. Up close, the lioness looked far worse than the camera feed had shown. Her flanks were too still, her skin drawn tight across weakening muscle. There were flecks of dust stuck to her whiskers from where her head had fallen earlier. The sound of her breathing was barely audible, a thin, inconsistent rattle that reminded Haley too much of the elderly patients she'd once helped while volunteering in a senior care program back in college. That same fragile sound, the one that signaled a body drifting toward silence. Dr. Lucas crouched beside her, keeping a respectful distance until he knew Atlas's intentions. His voice stayed low and steady like a physician talking a family through a critical medical decision. "Her contractions have stalled. Her uterus may be partially ruptured. She's losing oxygen. If she stops breathing completely, we'll have about a minute to react." Haley did not need to look at Atlas to feel his fear. It radiated off him like heat pulsing in slow, heavy waves. "Lucas," she whispered. "I need to check her airway." Before Lucas could answer, the lioness's body shuddered, then fell still. Haley froze. Her chest did not rise. Dr. Lucas leaned in sharply. No respiration. A thin surge of panic crawled up Haley's spine, not out of fear of Atlas, but fear of losing the lioness before they even had a chance to help. She reached forward, placing 2 fingers gently against the lioness's throat, searching desperately for movement. Any movement, nothing. Atlas released a sound unlike anything they had heard before. Not a roar, not even a growl. It was a long, broken sound that vibrated from deep within his chest, a sound a creature should never have to make. His massive body leaned forward, paused, digging into the earth. He nudged the lioness with a trembling urgency, as if trying to shake life back into her. "Atlas," Haley whispered, barely breathing herself. "Please give me a moment." For one dangerous second, it looked like Atlas might snap. Pain and instinct crashed violently inside him. He rose halfway, towering over Haley, pupils blown wide. Evan flinched behind her fingers, tightening on the tranquilizer grip. Haley didn't move. She raised her hand not to defend herself, but to show it was empty, open, helpless, human. The desert went silent. Atlas's breath hitched. His gaze flicked from her hand to her face, and something shifted. The line between threat and trust balanced in a fragile, trembling pause. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, Atlas stepped back. It wasn't a retreat. It was permission. Haley didn't waste a second. Lucas checked pulse. Lucas slid closer, placing his stethoscope against the lioness's ribcage. Faint. Extremely faint. "She's dying. We need to stimulate her now." Evan moved into position with controlled precision. "I can target a low-dose tranquilizer to keep her still, but if her breathing crashes again," Haley didn't let him finish. "Do it. She won't survive transport without stability." Atlas watched every move, but he didn't interfere. His entire body shook with the effort of holding himself in place. He looked like a creature praying if such a thing existed in the animal world. Evan fired a carefully measured dart, the tranquilizer whispering, as it struck the lioness's flank. She didn't even flinch. Haley slid her hand under the lioness's jaw, adjusting her head slightly to open her airway. Her thumb brushed warm fur, but the lioness's muscles felt frighteningly slack. "Come on, sweetheart," Haley murmured. "Don't give up now." Lucas pressed his fingers against the lioness's abdomen. "Her uterus is under severe strain. This isn't just stalled labor. Something is blocking the birth canal. If it's a twisted fetus or tissue injury, time is slipping fast." A small, cough-like tremor rushed out of the lioness's throat. Weak but real. "She's breathing again," Haley whispered. Relief soaked into her bones. Not well, but breathing. Atlas lowered himself again, lying so close that his mane brushed her hind leg. His head dropped to the ground, eyes fixed on the rescuers with a mixture of terror and trust. It reminded Haley of the expressions she'd seen on worried family members sitting outside operating rooms waiting for word from a surgeon. Life and death created the same look, no matter the species. "Prepare the field kit," Haley said. "We need to stabilize her before she arrests again." Maya stepped closer, hands trembling around her camera. "Haley, this is the first time I've seen a lion act like this. He's letting us help." "He doesn't have a choice," Haley replied softly. "When nature runs out of options, it does something extraordinary." As Lucas and Evan unpacked the critical care supplies, the lioness's breathing faltered again, dipping into frighteningly shallow waves. Atlas pressed his nose to her shoulder, nudging her as if begging her to stay. Haley gathered her tools, steadying her voice. "We have one chance. If we lose her here, the cubs go with her." The wind swept across the plain, carrying dust across the lioness's fur like falling ash. The moment felt suspended, hanging between worlds, one breath away from ending entirely. And then in the most fragile motion imaginable, the lioness's chest rose again. Lucas whispered, "She's still with us." Haley met Atlas's stare, her own eyes filled with a mixture of determination and empathy. "We're going to save her," she promised, quiet as a prayer. And for the first time that morning, hope felt real. The desert sun had climbed higher, washing the plain in a harsh white glare. As Haley and her team prepared, the emergency field station time no longer felt like minutes or seconds. It felt like a shrinking window tightening around the lioness's weakening life. The wind brushed over the dry sand in restless waves, as if the land itself was urging them to hurry. Atlas hovered nearby, every muscle taut his massive body, casting a long shadow across the improvised medical setup. He stayed close enough to intervene, yet far enough to show that he understood this was now in human hands. Evan knelt beside the lioness, monitoring the tranquilizer levels and her unstable breathing. Dr. Lucas opened the field kit on a tarp spread across the ground. Inside were surgical tools, sterile wraps, fluids, and a small portable oxygen supply. Equipment essential in wildlife rescue, though nowhere near the precision of a full veterinary center. Haley knew that this kind of intervention often felt like performing emergency health care in the middle of nowhere. The same way first responders sometimes worked in disaster zones without the comfort of a hospital or proper insurance-backed medical facilities. Out here, they had only their training, their instincts, and their hope. "We can't move her," Lucas said quietly, as he examined her abdomen again. "Her contractions are collapsing, and there's internal strain that looks severe. If we bounce her around in a truck, we might cause a rupture we can't repair." "So we do it here," Haley replied, her voice firm but calm. Lucas nodded. "Here, right now." Maya adjusted the light reflector she held, angling it so the sun illuminated the lioness's belly without blinding the others. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Haley, do you think Atlas knows what you're doing?" Haley glanced at the enormous lion who had settled into a crouch just a few yards away. Atlas's gaze followed every movement, each angle of each tool, each breath the rescuers took. He was too still, too focused. "He knows she's dying," Haley said softly. "That's enough." The lioness's body shuddered again, her breathing shallow and uneven. Evan leaned closer. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping. We need to stabilize her now." Lucas prepared a small incision area, applying antiseptic with quick, determined strokes. Without a surgical table or full equipment, he had to rely on field-experience techniques normally reserved for remote response teams or emergency backcountry operations. "This isn't ideal," what he said, "but ideal doesn't matter right now." Haley placed a hand on the lioness's flank, grounding both the animal and herself. "Lucas, walk me through what you need." "She has an obstruction," he explained. "Something's blocking the passage. It could be a twisted fetus or tissue buildup. Until we relieve the pressure, the cubs won't survive, and neither will she." Haley took a steady breath. "Let's do it." Lucas made the first careful incision. Small, clean, deliberate, not graphic, not deep enough to cause additional trauma. Maya looked away for a moment, swallowing hard. Even without gore, the weight of what was happening settled heavy in her chest. She wasn't just documenting a rescue. She was documenting the line between life and loss. "Hold the light steady," Lucas instructed. Maya adjusted her at an angle, and the reflection illuminated something beneath the skin. An unnatural hardness, a misshapen bulge pressing outward. Lucas's brows tightened. "There it is. That's the obstruction." Haley leaned closer, careful to keep her shadow from interfering. What is it? Looks like twisted tissue, Lucas answered. It's pressing on the birth canal. If we don't free it, nothing else will move. Evan administered another measured dose of tranquilizer. Her vitals are unstable. Haley, if we're going to do this, it needs to be fast, but controlled. Atlas rose halfway, sensing the tension spike. He made a deep, low rumble that vibrated across the sand. Haley looked up at him, lifting her hand in a calming gesture. It's okay. We're helping her. Atlas lowered himself again, but his eyes didn't soften. They burned with fear. Lucas worked quickly, but carefully, guiding the twisted tissue loose. Haley steadied the lioness's abdomen, feeling her weak breaths through her gloves. Easy, easy now. A sudden release of pressure made the lioness's body convulse lightly. That's it, Lucas said. The obstruction just freed. Haley leaned back, breath escaping her lips. Lucas, what now? Now we hope her body can respond, he replied. The cubs might still be alive, but they're in distress. Her uterus is exhausted. Evan adjusted the oxygen feed, lifting the lioness's head slightly to keep her airway open. Her breathing just improved. It's faint, but it's better than before. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of sand and sun across the clearing. Atlas rose again, not in alarm, but in recognition. He stepped closer by a single deliberate stride. Haley didn't move an inch. The lioness's abdomen twitched. Maya gasped softly. Is that a contraction? Lucas nodded. A weak one. But yes, her body's responding. The lioness's tail flicked barely but undeniably alive. Haley felt hope bloom in her chest, fragile but spreading like the first warm light of morning. Come on, girl, she whispered. You're not done yet. Lucas packed the incision area with protective material, doing everything possible to stabilize her in the field. We'll still have to deliver the cubs manually, he said. She doesn't have the strength. Evan met Haley's gaze. She needs a controlled extraction, but at least now she has a chance. Atlas watched every movement with unwavering attention, his massive frame trembling with the weight of hope and fear. The lioness's breath steadied, still faint, but no longer slipping away. Haley rose to her feet, dust clinging to her knees. We're not losing her, she said. Not today. Lucas nodded, preparing for the next phase. All right, let's get ready to bring those cubs into the world. The wind shifted once more, carrying with it the sense that the desert had begun to breathe again, slowly, painfully, but unmistakably alive. And for the first time since dawn, the lioness did not look like she was fading. She looked like she was fighting. The air around the makeshift surgical site felt unbearably tight, as if the desert itself held its breath with the rescuers. The obstruction had been freed, but now Haley and Dr. Lucas faced the next far more delicate step, bringing the cubs safely into the world before the lioness's body failed again. Each second stretched thin, woven with worry, hope, and the silent presence of the massive lion who watched every movement. Atlas had moved closer without anyone noticing at first. One moment he was crouched several yards away. The next he was only a few long strides from Haley, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that bordered on heartbreaking. He didn't growl. He didn't posture. He simply stared, his breath heavy, his man stirring in the wind, as though willing them to save what he could not. Haley knelt beside the lioness again, her hands steady despite the tremor running beneath her ribs. The lioness's abdomen twitched weakly, struggling to respond after hours of stalled labor. Her breathing had improved slightly, but each inhale still seemed fragile, like a thread threatening to snap under its own weight. We're going in, Lucas murmured. Keep an eye on her vitals. Evan. Evan's voice carried the calm of someone trained to handle emergencies, whether they involved an injured animal or a family dealing with unexpected medical costs. Oxygen flow, steady heart rate, shallow but holding. Lucas made a careful, controlled motion. Nothing graphic, nothing deep enough to frighten the lioness's already exhausted body. Haley supported the area gently, making sure not to apply pressure. Maya shifted the reflector again, casting just enough light to guide Lucas without startling Atlas. A soft gasp escaped Mia's lips. "I see movement." Haley leaned closer. "Lucas, is that..." Before she could finish, something slipped free. It wasn't a cub. Not yet. A heavy mass eased outward into Lucas's waiting hands, a twisted bundle of tissue swollen from blocking the birth canal. It was intact, harmless looking on its own, but its presence had nearly killed the lioness and her unborn young. Maya pressed her hand to her mouth. That was inside her. Lucas nodded grimly. This was the obstruction. Without removing it, she wouldn't have had a chance. Haley swallowed, her voice low. Then that's the thing that almost ended her. The lioness's body reacted immediately after the obstruction was freed. Her abdomen tightened, then released again, weak but determined. A contraction, then another faint, but real. Lucas positioned himself quickly. Next one's coming. This should be a cub. Atlas rose halfway, a ripple of tension running through his powerful shoulders. His breath grew louder, puffing clouds of dust from the ground. Haley raised her hand toward him, not to stop him, but to reassure him. Easy. It's happening. She's fighting. The lioness's body shifted. A small, fragile form slid into view, limp, pale, and frighteningly silent. A cub. But it didn't move. Haley's heart stopped for a beat. She met Lucas's eyes, her voice tight. Pulse. Lucas touched the tiny chest gently. Weak. Very weak. No breath yet. Haley didn't hesitate. She gathered the cub carefully into her gloved hands, cupping it with the tenderness of someone cradling something impossibly precious. It weighed almost nothing, just damp fur, soft paws, and a spark of life slipping through thinning cracks. Evan knelt beside her. Haley, he's not breathing. I know, she whispered, her voice steady, despite the panic coiling in her ribs. But he has a heartbeat. That means we don't give up. She tilted the cub slightly, brushing a finger along its tiny chest. She performed gentle compressions, not enough to harm, but enough to coax the body into remembering what life meant. Her breaths came slow and even, guiding the rhythm. 10 seconds, 15. The desert was so quiet that even Atlas's heartbeat felt audible, pulsing through the air like a drum. Come on, Haley murmured. Come on, little one. Then, just as the silence threatened to crush her hope, a tiny squeak broke through the air, barely a sound, barely a breath. But it was enough. Atlas jerked upright, his head snapping toward Haley. His ears twitched, mane trembling, as if he recognized the sound not just as life, but as the life he had been waiting for. Haley let out a breath that trembled from relief. There you go, you're here. You're really here. Maya wiped her eyes quickly, pretending it was just dust. I can't believe I'm seeing this. Lucas checked the lioness again. She's stabilizing, weak but responsive. This first cub, he might be a fighter. Atlas took a cautious step forward, and for the first time since the rescue began, the rumble in his chest changed. Not fear, not anger, something softer, something like a deep, trembling sigh of hope. Haley held the cub close to keep him warm. The little body twitched again, stronger this time, an unmistakable sign that the fight for life had begun. "Lucas," she said softly, "are the others moving?" He nodded. "They're alive. And now that the path is clear, we have a real chance." Haley looked back at Atlas, whose eyes glistened under the harsh sun. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows his cub just breathed." For the first time since dawn, the desert didn't feel silent anymore. It felt like it was listening. And somewhere in the fragile space between fear and hope, a new heartbeat had joined the world. The desert light had begun its slow shift toward late afternoon, softening from harsh white to a muted gold, as Haley's team prepared the Lioness for transport. The field surgery had bought them precious time, but she was still hanging on by only a thin thread of strength. Her breaths were shallow. Her muscles were limp from exhaustion. And though the first cub had taken its tiny, miraculous breath, the Lioness would not survive without intensive care at the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Evans secured the portable oxygen mask over her muzzle, adjusting the straps gently so as not to cause discomfort. Lucas kept a hand on her abdomen, monitoring the subtle signs of life with the watchful eye of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing compassion with clinical precision. He spoke quietly, as though afraid that a louder voice might tip her over the edge. "She's stable enough for a controlled transport, but this has to be slow, steady, no sudden jolts." Haley nodded. "Let's move her." Atlas rose the moment the team shifted their weight toward the stretcher. His body tensed, mane lifting slightly with the surge of instinct, but he didn't lunge. He didn't even growl. He watched unblinking, as if trying to understand what these humans were doing to the lifeless form of his mate. Haley approached him first, stepping closer with calm, deliberate movements. "We have to take her now," she said softly, though she knew he couldn't understand the words. But animals often understood tone far better than language. "If she stays here, she won't make it. Let us take her somewhere safe." Atlas tilted his head, ears twitching at the shift in her voice. For a long moment, the two simply looked at each other, predator and human both suspended in the same fragile hope. The desert wind brushed between them, carrying a tension usually reserved for life-changing moments, like when families debated tough financial decisions, insurance coverage, or high-stakes medical choices. The kind where whatever you choose, you live with the consequences forever. Slowly, so slowly, that Haley's breath caught in surprise, Atlas lowered his head. Permission. Evan and Lucas slid the stretcher beneath the Lioness, lifting her with the utmost care. Dust rose around her limp form, swaying in tiny spirals that glimmered in the lowering sun. Maya climbed into the back of the rescue vehicle to keep the cub warm against her chest, wrapped in a soft cloth lined with a portable heating pad. "Vital steady," Evan announced, climbing into the driver's seat of the second vehicle. "We need to keep her oxygen up. Watch for shock." "Let's get moving," Haley replied. "Short route. Avoid bumps." The first truck jolted to life, its engine humming low as it eased forward onto the sandy path. Lucas supported the Lioness's head, while Maya held the cub close, whispering encouragements, even though the tiny creature couldn't possibly understand. The second vehicle, carrying field supplies and backup equipment, followed behind it. Haley glanced over her shoulder at Atlas before closing the door. He was following, not just walking behind them. He was pacing with purpose, his giant paws landing in heavy, deliberate steps. His head was lowered, man sweeping around his neck like a wind-tossed crown. The setting sun cast his silhouette across the plain, stretching it long and regal behind him. Maya's voice trembled as she looked out the rear window. "Haley, he's escorting us." Haley didn't look back immediately, afraid that the moment would shatter if acknowledged too quickly. But when she finally turned her head, the sight stole her breath. "My God, he's really doing it." Not a chase, not a threat, not a territorial display. An escort. A father walking behind the vehicle carrying his family. It was a sight so profound that even Evan, normally the calmest member of the team, murmured under his breath, "I've never seen anything like this, not even in documentaries." They drove slowly, no faster than a careful walk, avoiding rocks, dips, and uneven ground. The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in shades of amber. Atlas matched their speed the entire way, occasionally trotting to keep pace whenever the vehicle picked up speed on smoother terrain. His breaths were heavy but steady, clouds of dust kicking up behind each step. As they approached the paved road leading to the main highway, something the Lion would never cross, the rescue vehicle slowed to a stop. Haley leaned out her window, watching Atlas as he came to rest a few feet behind them. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He simply stared at the vehicle containing the Lioness, his eyes glowing with an emotion too complex to explain. Devotion, fear, love, all wrapped together in silence. "It's like he's telling us to bring her home," Maya whispered, tears welling. Haley nodded slowly. "He trusts us." Atlas took a few more steps before the road's heat and unfamiliar texture stopped him. He stood at the edge of the pavement, paws pressed into the last patch of sun-warmed dirt. He lowered his head once more, almost like a bow. "Let's go," Haley said softly. "He's letting us take it from here." The rescue vehicles pulled away from the desert engines humming over the smooth asphalt. Through the rear window, they watched Atlas grow smaller. First, a golden figure glowing in the sun, then a dark silhouette, then finally a distant shape still standing at the edge of the dust road. He didn't return to the grasslands. He didn't walk away. He waited, still silent, unmoving, as if the desert had appointed him its sentinel. Haley stared through the glass long after his figure disappeared from sight. "We won't fail you," she whispered. "Not her, not the cub." And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the rescue vehicle carried the Lioness toward the only hope she had left, while behind them, alone in the fading light, a king kept his silent vigil. Night had settled over the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center by the time Haley's team arrived, its lights glowing like a quiet oasis against the vast stretch of desert darkness. The rescue staff moved swiftly, guided by routine yet fueled by urgency. Within minutes, the Lioness was transferred to the intensive care enclosure, a clean temperature-regulated space bordered by reinforced glass and soft bedding. She lay motionless, oxygen mask in place, her breaths shallow but rhythmic. It was more than Haley had dared to hope for a few hours earlier. The newborn cub, the one Haley had cradled during transport, was placed in a small incubator designed for fragile wildlife infants. The heating pad beneath him hummed softly, keeping his temperature stable. His tiny chest rose and fell with shallow but steady breaths, each one a miracle stitched together by determination and chance. Maya hovered nearby, watching through the glass of the incubator with tear-bright eyes. "He's stronger than he looks," she whispered. "I didn't think he'd make it through the ride." Lucas adjusted the cub's position gently. "He's underweight, dehydrated, and he's been through trauma. He'll need round-the-clock care, but he's fighting." Haley leaned over the incubator, her voice softening. "Little guy, you didn't come all this way to give up now." The cub stirred faintly, a tiny paw twitching against the soft towel. Haley noticed something unusual in the dim light, the slightest silver sheen along his fur, like strands catching the glow from the heat lamp. Not bright, not unnatural, but distinct. "Look at his coat," she murmured. "Is it just the light?" Lucas studied the cub closely. Some lion cubs have lighter winter coats at birth, but this shade, it's rare, and he opened his eyes a little earlier than expected. That's even more unusual. Maya smiled faintly. "Maybe he's special," Haley didn't reply, but in her heart she agreed. She'd seen hundreds of cubs over the years, but none had fought this hard to be here. None had come back from the brink with such quiet defiance. She gently traced a gloved fingertip across the glass. "Silver," she whispered. "That's your name." The cub's eyes, barely open, seemed to flicker at the sound, though Haley knew he couldn't possibly understand. Still, it felt right. A name born from survival. While the team cared for the lioness and the first cub, 2 additional cubs were carefully delivered from the mother under sedation. These 2, though small, were stronger, their cries sharp enough to echo through the enclosure. They were cleaned, dried, and placed beside their tiny sibling in a cluster of warmth and faint mews. It was a fragile little family, 3 cubs fighting to find their place in a world that had nearly denied them. But Haley couldn't stop thinking about Atlas. She stepped outside the treatment building and stood near the tall boundary fence, her breath turning to mist in the cool desert night. The moon cast pale silver light across the landscape, painting every dune and scrub bush in a soft glow. The desert was calm, too calm. She had half hoped, half feared that Atlas would follow them all the way here. He hadn't, but she knew lions didn't waste energy wandering aimlessly. If he came back, he would come with purpose. The next morning before sunrise, Haley returned to check on the lioness. To her relief, the mother was stirring weakly but alive. Her tail twitched. Her breathing had deepened, growing steadier. She even shifted slightly, her instincts fighting through the heavy fog of exhaustion. When the staff gently placed the 2 stronger cubs near her belly, she responded with a faint rumble, a mother's call, thin but unmistakable. Haley felt her throat tighten. "She's waking up," she whispered. "She's really waking up." Silver, however, remained in the incubator by necessity. His lungs were too weak, his body too small. But when Haley lifted him for feeding, something unexpected happened. His tiny ears perked, his nose twitched. He let out a faint cry, not toward her, but toward the window that overlooked the far boundary of the reserve. Lucas raised a brow. "What's he reacting to?" "I'm not sure," Haley said, but when she followed the cub's gaze through the glass, her breath caught in her chest. A familiar silhouette stood at the edge of the outer fence. Atlas, the sunrise framed him in a fiery halo, his man glowing gold against the horizon. He didn't roar. He didn't pace. He simply stood there, massive and unmoving, his ember's eyes fixed on the facility walls, as if he could see straight through them. Maya, who had entered the room just behind Haley, gasped softly. He came back. Every morning that week, Atlas appeared at the same time just before dawn, standing or lying down near the fence. He never crossed the boundary, never tried to force his way in. He simply waited, as though time had frozen for him, as if nothing mattered except knowing his family was near. Haley often stepped out to watch him from a distance, the early light turning the desert air cool against her face. She'd never seen anything like it. A king of the savannah, reduced neither in strength nor dignity, keeping vigil like a solitary guardian. It reminded her of the way families waited outside hospital rooms praying for their loved ones, hoping for recovery, fearing the worst, ready to accept whatever came. And each morning, Silver responded to him. Whenever Atlas arrived, the tiny cub, still weaker than his siblings, would lift his head from the blanket, searching. Sometimes he squeaked. Other times he reached out with tiny paws, as if drawn by some instinct he wasn't meant to understand yet. His siblings didn't react this way, only him. Lucas noticed it by the 3rd day. "It's like he knows," he said gently. "He knows his father is out there." Haley held Silver close, her heart swelling. Maybe that's what kept him alive. Maybe he wasn't ready to leave. Silver's breathing grew steadier with each passing day. His eyes opened wider, his limbs strengthened, and while he remained the smallest, he was also the fiercest. Tiny claws flexing whenever he was lifted, tiny growls rumbling from a chest barely bigger than Haley's palm. He had refused to die, and now it seemed he was learning how to live. As the days passed, the lioness grew strong enough to lift her head and nuzzle her larger cubs. Her recovery was slow but unmistakable. She was coming back to herself, coming back to her babies, coming back to life. And every dawn without fail, Atlas stood outside the fence, a lone figure in the desert light, waiting, watching, holding on. And whether it was instinct, scent, or something deeper woven into their blood, Silver always reacted as though the smallest cub understood something the world often forgot. Sometimes the strongest bond isn't the loudest. Sometimes it's the quiet one, the one that refuses to break even through metal fences and miles of uncertainty. The morning the rehabilitation team decided the lioness was strong enough to return home began with a silence so soft it felt sacred. The desert sky was painted in muted lavender, the kind of dawn that made even the most rugged ranger stop and breathe for a moment. Haley stood outside the release enclosure, her hands resting on the metal door as she watched the lioness take her first steady steps in days. Her muscles trembled slightly from the effort, but there was strength beneath the weakness. Strength born from survival. The 3 cubs huddled beside her feet, stumbling clumsily in their excitement. The 2 stronger siblings pawed at their mother's legs, letting out tiny mews while Silver, still small, still delicate, stayed close to her chest. He lifted his head the moment he sensed the open air beyond the gate, as though recognizing something the others didn't yet understand. "Today's the day," Lucas said quietly, beside Haley, adjusting the paperwork required for wildlife release. "She's ready." "They all are." Haley nodded. "And he's out there." "I know he is." As if summoned by her words, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, Atlas framed by the soft glow of morning light. He moved like a silent force across the earth, his man rippling with each step. He stopped just short of the outer fence, the same place he had waited every day since the rescue, his amber eyes fixed on the building that held his family. Maya lifted her camera but lowered it again, just as quickly. Some moments weren't meant to be recorded. Some were meant to be witnessed. Haley placed a hand on the door latch. "Let's bring them home." The gate swung open with a slow, creaking sigh. Dust swirled around the lioness's paws as she stepped into the desert. She blinked against the sun, sniffing the wind, her instincts rising like a dormant fire. Her cubs tumbled behind her, in a clumsy, chaotic line, 2 bold, 1 fragile. But Silver paused. The tiny cub turned back toward Haley, his pale coat catching the light like a soft shimmer of frost. It wasn't bright or unnatural, just a faint glow that made him look different, unique. He let out a faint cry, a sound that tugged at Haley's harder than she expected. "You're ready," she whispered. "Go on, sweetheart." Silver turned toward the open world and began his small journey into the desert. As the lioness moved farther from the enclosure, Atlas suddenly rose from his spot, his chest expanding with a powerful inhale. Every muscle in his body stiffened, not in aggression, but in anticipation. He took slow, deliberate steps toward them, each footfall stirring the sand in a soft plume. Haley held her breath. The lioness stopped. For a moment, the 2 simply stared across the stretch of earth between them, mates separated by fear, pain, and the fragile threat of survival. Then the lioness made a soft rumble deep in her throat, calling to him. Atlas answered with a sound so low, it vibrated through the ground beneath Haley's boots. They closed the distance in a few solemn strides. Atlas lowered his massive head and pressed his muzzle gently against hers, not as a king reclaiming territory, but as a partner reunited with the piece of himself he thought he had lost. It was quiet, tender, almost human in its warmth. Maya wiped at her eyes. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like this." Lucas nodded, his voice thick. "This is why we do what we do." Then Atlas turned to the cubs. The two stronger siblings pranced forward first, batting playfully at his paws. He sniffed them, nudged them, approving their antics like a father welcoming his children. But when Silver stepped forward, small, pale, trembling ever so slightly, Atlas froze. He lowered his head slowly until his nose nearly touched the cub's tiny forehead. Silver squeaked. Atlas responded by pressing his muzzle softly to the cub's head, in a gesture no one there had ever witnessed. Alan's way of marking acceptance, protection, and something far deeper that no textbook could ever explain. Haley felt her breath catch. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows that one almost didn't make it." Silver responded with a boldness none of them expected. He placed a tiny paw on the bridge of Atlas's nose as if claiming him in return. The lioness rumbled her approval, circling her cubs, nudging them toward the open desert. She looked back at Haley one last time, an instinctive pause, a moment of recognition between two mothers who had fought for the same fragile lives. And then the family turned toward the dunes. Atlas led the way, the lioness by his side, their three cubs scrambling behind them. They moved across the golden sand until of the heat. Haze swallowed their silhouettes, blending them into the horizon once more. Haley stood in the fading glow, her heart full and aching. "We didn't just save a life," she said softly. "We saved a legacy." Lucas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And that little one, Silver, he's going to be something special. You can feel it." Maya nodded. It's like he knew his father was there every morning calling to him. Haley watched the last wisp of dust settle into silence. Maybe that's what kept him alive. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The desert was quiet again, but not empty. It felt full of life, of hope, of the kind of miracle that didn't need insurance paperwork, legal terms, or financial security to feel priceless. Finally, as the sun fully crested the horizon, Haley whispered the words that had been forming in her heart for days. Sometimes what comes into the world isn't just a life. It's a reminder of why we choose compassion even when the wild asks for it in silence. And with that, the team turned back toward the rehabilitation center. Forever changed by this morning, a dying lioness lived. A tiny cub refused to die. And a king waited long enough to see his family whole again. If you felt something in your heart while watching this story, just drop a simple one in the comments. You don't have to write anything long. Just a one lets me know you were here and that you cared. And if you'd like to hear more real, emotional wildlife stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. There are so many journeys left to share, and I'd be honored to have you with me for the next one.